Welcome to the Word Unwrapped podcast
with Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning.
And now here's your host, Dr. Gregg Curtis.
Welcome to another podcast of the Word Unwrapped. I'm your host, Dr. Gregg Curtis, and in the studio with us today, I have my associate here, Susannah Sizemore. We're going to be talking about some interesting questions today. One of those questions that often I get, and good people ask this question: is it okay for a Christian to drink alcohol? And maybe you've had that same question put to you, and it certainly is controversial.
It can be, and I also think it's something that's growing. I don't know, I feel like I'm seeing that more maybe than when I was growing up, and so I'm interested to see, your take on that.
Yeah, I think this country went through a period, went the temperance time, and of course we passed an amendment to our Constitution which outlawed alcohol totally, and then that was repealed by another amendment. So there was a period of time in America where alcohol was just the big taboo. Then we have to stop and say, well, okay, what does the Bible have to say? And as Christians, what should be our attitude? And there are several things we can look at, but when you look at wine in the Bible, we find the word wine mentioned many, many times. Now, the interesting thing about the word wine, oinos, in the Greek language, is this, that it can refer to fresh grape juice, or it can refer to fermented, grape juice. So
because I've heard people say, oh, well, the wine in the Bible wasn't like the wine we have today. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
In the sense that we know how to make wine and increase the alcohol level.
Right.
Wine in the Bible was used mainly because the water was so contaminated.
Right, they were limited on what they could drink.
And you'll remember the Apostle Paul told Timothy, he said, drink a little wine for your stomach's sake. Evidently the water he was drinking was causing some kind of GI issue. And so Paul says, look, just drink some wine and that'll help settle it down. Don't drink the water in that area because it's not fit to drink for whatever reasons. So sanitary water is an issue all around the world, actually. Many countries today don't have access to good water. So the question is, what kind of wine did they drink in the Bible? The Bible doesn't come out and condemn alcohol. When you stop and look at what the Bible condemns, it condemns drunkenness and addiction.
Right.
And it says this is what you're wanting to avoid.
And there's a slippery slope there, because we know there are people that cannot handle alcohol for whatever reason.
They cannot.
Yes.
And so a lot of times I think we come to that question, well, since there are people who have addictive personality types, or their body type it lends itself to, being not able to metabolize alcohol like other people can. So they're addicted almost from the beginning.
Yes.
And so some people have said, and I think rightly so, that we as Christians need to be real careful, not that if we took a drink, it would be sinful, but would we be causing someone to stumble, in some way giving permission for someone to drink who in turn has one of these addictive personalities or has a body not able to metabolize alcohol like other people, and therefore they are just hooked. They would have been better off never take the first drink.
Right.
And so we don't want to be making it easy for them to take the first drink. But then again, at the same time, do we want to say it's sinful? So I think trying to find that balance. It's okay for some people to drink, but for some people they probably should never drink.
My dad, growing up, my grandfather died when he was 10 years old. He was an alcoholic. And I can remember my dad sitting me down and saying, listen, this is how our family has reacted to this.
Yeah.
So why take the chance?
That's right.
You don't know. And I just remember that standing out to me thinking, well, that kind of makes sense. But he said, some people can drink and that never bothers them. He said, our family doesn't have that history.
Right.
And so, that was sort of the way he talked to me about it, and I thought that made sense.
Well, and my her granddad was an alcoholic. He could not just take one drink. One drink led to another and another, and after a while, he was just totally blind drunk. So he was an alcoholic, and even in my own family, we've seen that alcoholism just totally takes over, destroys.
And years ago, wasn't talked about much. Sometimes they just died, and that was just sort of the end of it. Whereas now, I think there is more open dialogue to say, hey, how is this affecting you?
Right.
How did it affect your family?
And then we also get into this, the medical community is divided on this, because there for a while they were saying like red wine is good for the heart and cardiovascular in small amounts. And it had a chemical in it that was supposedly healthy. And now I've been reading that they're coming out saying no amount of alcohol.
I thought, who funded that study maybe and said that? Because you're right, I've just recently been seeing that no, it's actually not good.
Yeah. So, obviously medical science, I guess we'd say the jury's still out on what is right about drinking alcohol. But we do know that in the Bible times, there was a certain amount of fermentation in the wine they had. Now, it wasn't the kind of fermentation that we have today in our wine that is pretty heavy on the alcohol. It was a small amount of alcohol. Jesus talked about this when he says you don't put new wine, that is fresh squeezed grape juice, in an old wineskin.
Right.
Why? Because he says when it begins to ferment, and fermentation is a breaking down and giving off gas, that gas would expand that wineskin. Now, a new wineskin has room to expand. An old wineskin has already expanded. It has no room. So when the fermentation process starts and it gives off that gas is going to split the old wineskin, and then you're going to lose it. So again, Jesus was talking about a very common process in that day. So did they know how to make, the kind of alcohol that knock your head off? Yes, they did.
Because they talk about drunkenness. It's talked about in the Bible.
And the Bible condemns drunkenness. And it condemns it because a lot of people who are drunks are addicts. They get addicted to it. Now, the Bible does talk about alcohol, and I have some verses here that's kind of interesting. In regard to alcohol, in Ecclesiastes 9:7 instructs, drink your wine with a merry heart. Psalm 104 states that God gives wine that makes glad the heart of men. Amos 9:14 discusses drinking wine from your own vineyard is a sign of God's blessing. And Isaiah 55:1 says, yes, come buy wine and milk. Now the question is this. Okay, so the Bible's talking about wine, but again, we use one word to describe everything from fresh squeezed grape juice to long-standing fermented wine. And it's one word. So sometimes context has to determine what kind of wine we're talking about. So I think if we're talking about the kind that you deliberately make in order to get drunk on, that's one thing. But if you're talking about a little fermentation that is there to kill harmful bacteria and in order to keep your family healthy, that's another thing. So I think context determines what we're talking about. Now, the question often arises, some churches use fresh squeezed grape juice for communion,
Right.
and some churches use fermented wine for communion. And I've been asked that question, well, Pastor, is it okay to use fermented wine for communion? And here's the thing, communion, the wine represents the blood of Christ. Christ's blood was fresh squeezed, if you want to use that term, on the cross. Fermentation is a death process.
Oh, it's making sense now. I know what you're going to say.
So we don't use fermented wine because we're not celebrating a death process.
Right.
We're celebrating life. And the blood of Christ was his lifeblood that gives life to us.
Yes.
Okay, so that's why we use Grape juice. So again, we have one word that describes all kinds of wine. And so when we use the word wine, a lot of people immediately think of fermented, but that's not necessarily the case. That's not true.
So for the Christian who wants to have a glass of wine with dinner and you're out in public, I think that's something to think about, and you mentioned it earlier, as is that going to lead other people astray? Just your witness of sitting there with a drink, could that be misleading to other people?
Well, and it could be for some people. Some people are going to see you taking that glass of wine, which is not a sin for you, but it is a stumbling stone to them.
Right.
And they're going to say, I don't think she or he should be drinking because. And it creates a problem for them. So it's not that it's sinful, but is it wise? Is it the best?
Right. And do you need it? I mean, it's kind of one of those things that's like,
Right.
do you really need to do that?
Right, absolutely. And the answer is no, you don't need to. But at the same time, we don't want to get legalistic about it
Right.
and say if you take a drink of wine at home with your meal that somehow you're sinning.
Right.
Now, if your conscience will not allow you, okay, then if you can't do it in faith, because whatever is not of faith is sin. So if your conscience is creating
If you're
a problem,
bothered by it, or if you're thinking,
just don't do it.
maybe I shouldn't do this, listen.
Yeah, don't do it.
Yeah.
So I think the big answer, if we're coming back to all this, is taking a drink sinful? No. I think getting drunk, I know, is sinful. The Bible says do not give strong drink to someone in order to get them drunk. That's wrong. So there's a lot of things that we look at, and sometimes wine is used as a medicine, even antiseptic. So how you use it, your motivation, and wanting to be sure you give a clear testimony and not cause somebody to stumble who may have a problem with alcohol. I think all of that needs to be taken into consideration.
Thank you for being a part of the Word Unwrapped podcast with Dr. Gregg Curtis. In this podcast, we take a deeper dive into some of your favorite Bible verses that may require some added context to further explain their intended meaning. If you have a question or would like to suggest a topic idea for discussion, email us at thewordunwrapped@gmail.com, and we may use your question in a future episode. If you enjoyed today's program, please click the subscribe button, and we'll notify you when new episodes become available. And remember to click the share button if you'd like to send this podcast to family and friends.